Hi, in this video we're going to learn about the Netiquette project. The Netiquette project is a web page that you're going to create that will list some basic Netiquette principles for a group of learners to follow. Netiquette and these social conventions that we follow are basically ways that we can help more effectively communicate with other people when using electronic correspondence such as email, chat, and discussion forums. So in this assignment, we want you to do a couple things. First, we want you to learn about Netiquette and create some principles and guidelines about Netiquette for a group of learners that you could possibly use in your day-to-day life. But we also want you to dig deeper into HTML5, CSS, and using Dreamweaver. And so the idea is that you're going to create a one-page web page that is focused on Netiquette. Before you begin, you should look at the rubric provided by your instructor to see what are the key elements that you need in this web page to get full credit. In this assignment, as well as this course in general, you're focusing on whenever possible, when appropriate, using HTML5. There will be times where it makes sense to fall back on some XHTML principles, and so we will talk about some of those as we start diving into this assignment specifically. You'll notice that you will need to have a learner description that tells the reader who you're focusing these Netiquette principles on, as well as some basic Netiquette principles and a callout box. And you'll see that from the rubric that there's also some other requirements, as in specific tags or specific ways that your instructor wants you to use CSS. So be sure to take a look at those as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to open Dreamweaver. I'm going to show you how you would create a basic page like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. I'm going to do a file, save as, and I have a shortcut on my desktop that brings me to my 502 folder, and I'm going to save it as Netiquette. In this case, I've already done it, and so I'm just going to do a save and replace it. Yes, I would like to override it. So then when you're working with HTML5, when you think about layout, there's really little consensus on the best way to lay out a page. And so with that in mind, we're going to actually try to use the section and the side tag in this example, as well as the header and footer. We're not going to use navigation because there's no navigation. We're not going to use any articles. But we are going to use multiple sections for each of the sections of the page, and so hopefully this will start to make sense. And if you look at this example, let's pull this up because this is kind of a before and after. So with XHTML, you would always create a div and you would call it header. Well, HTML5, to revisit this, gives you the header tag, and so it simplifies it. Same thing with the navigation. But we still find ourselves at times using things like div ID equals callout or something else. Maybe at times when the side tag doesn't make sense. And a lot of times you'll also see people still use the container. And so they'll basically create a div ID equals container to contain everything. And so there isn't any rule that says you can't mix and match some of the old XHTML layout principles with HTML5. The idea, though, is to use as much HTML5 as you can that's going to make your pages load faster, make search engines be able to make sense of the content faster, and etc. So with that in mind, we are going to jump right in here. And so there are some great videos out there and resources on what's called the box model. That's something to also revisit if you're unfamiliar with. But what we're going to do right now, and I'm going to simply keep split view open, is I can do this by going to Insert, Layout Objects, and Div Tag, and I'm going to do div ID equals container, and so then you'll see that it did this container for me. And in this case, I'm not interested in the text here, but I want to do everything else within it, so I'm going to delete that and just keep one letter so I see where I'm at. And over split view, I'm just going to give myself some space. And then looking through the example, there's a header, there's some sections, there's an aside, and there's a footer. And so working through that kind of framework, I'm going to, in this case, I'm just going to type right in here. I could keep going insert, tag, and and try to dig down in here, but in this case, it's just a lot faster. And you'll find over time it'll just start making sense. I'm going to put a header and I'm going to say add header So there's my header tag. I'm going to add a section, and I'm going to add multiple sections. And so basically for each section or paragraph, if you want to think of it, I'm just going to go ahead and add a section. And right now I don't know how many. In the example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 it looks like. So we'll just use 6. Okay. So after that, I'm going to add a footer. So HTML5 has that great footer tag. And I'm going to click over here and I can see the basic layout of what I've done. The one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an aside. And right now I'm just going to put it under here. I'm going to put aside. I'm going to call this callout. That's traditionally what people call these, is an aside or a callout. So if we go back to the example, it's this right here. Okay, so now that I have some of the basic structure here, I could start by typing in the information that I wanted to. And so in this case, I could type in title, and I could go down, and each one of these, and these are the principles that I've identified. So I could copy and paste some of this to make it go faster, but I think it's good always to just have practice typing in Dreamweaver and getting very comfortable with Dreamweaver. So let me check. I'm looking on screen now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, there's only 5, so I don't need this. And notice how here I can delete it in my design view, but often when you delete things in your design view, it doesn't get all of the code. And so I like to have my split view open and do it that way. So the next step is I'm going to start to style a few of these things just for it to start to take shape. So what I'm going to start with the container. So I'm going to click on here, the container, and I can always check down here that I've selected it, or anywhere in here. I can see the container, so I can click on that. And then I have my CSS panels here. I'm going to click on the plus sign, and it's going to say, do I want to add a style to container? And I do. In this case, I want to make sure I have new style sheet. I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to open my styles folder, and I'm going to call it Netiquette. So now when I have this window open, I'm going to just do some basic things to start to style this page. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on box, and I'm going to set up my width. I'm just going to do 960. It's a common width if you're going to do a fixed width, which in this case I'm going to. And I'm going to do my margin. I'm going to undo this and do my margin right to auto, my margin left to auto, and that's going to center my div. I'm going to go ahead and set 10 pixels for padding for all. That looks good. Click on background, and I'm going to add a background color. In this case, I know the one I want to use, so I'm just going to paste in the hex value there. And go down to border now, and I'm going to uncheck these, because I'm only going to do my left and my right. Because if we look at the example again, in this case, there's just a thin border going down there. So I'm going to add a solid, and I'm going to do the width as thin. And then the color, I know the color I'm going to use, so I'm just going to type in the value there. If I didn't, I could definitely look around. So in this case, it's a gray, but you could, definitely mouse over or use your cursor to explore. You can also explore by going in here and getting a lighter shade. And so there are a lot of different things you can do there. But right now, I'm going to hit OK. And it's telling me it doesn't like that I have the semicolon there. So try that again. There we go. All right, so we have the basic layout kind of taking shape. So now what we're going to do is we're going to click on header, and down here I'm going to make sure I have it selected, and I'm going to hit the plus sign. In this case, I can be less specific. I just want to redefine the header. I want to make sure it's in Netiquette. That's correct. And I select OK. So in this case, I'm going to actually make that header a different font. I'm just going to select 36 pixels right now. Obviously, we've discussed it before. There's a lot of decisions or choices you can make when you deal with font size for a page. I'm going to actually make it bold. Make it black. I'm going to go to block, and I'm going to make sure under display I have block selected. This becomes especially important when you're using HTML5 tags and you want them to show up like a rectangle, like a block, like you expect it to be. Go to border, and I'm going to do a bottom border. So I'm going to do solid, thin, and I'm going to do that same color gray before that I did. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to hit apply, and as you see, when you hit apply, you can start seeing some of this take shape. So background color, I'm basically just going to use the one for the container, but I could always mouse over and use my color picker to mirror it, but in this case that's not needed. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on my padding and my margin. So I'm going to just add a little space above and below. And so thinking about my padding, I'm going to give 30 pixels. We'll say above, 30 pixels below. We'll hit apply, and we can see that take shape. And then for margin, I'm just going to give a bottom margin of, we'll say 10 pixels, just to separate it. I'm going to hit OK. And so you can start seeing it take shape. I'm going to save all. And then I can always just go to live view if I want to see what it looks like. And I'm going to go to design live view. And I can see what it would look like in a typical browser. But if I want to test it even better, I can always just go preview in Firefox. And I can see what it looks like. And I can see it kind of taking shape. But you can see it's still kind of a mess down here. And so this is where I'm going to focus now on the section. And so section, I'm going to click down here in section. And I'm going to click on the plus sign in the CSS panel. I'm going to be less specific, make sure it's in my external file, and I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to go to block and display block and hit apply. Now you can see it creates these little dotted guides that we had before, so that looks good. And for now, we go to box and we'll do padding and we'll do, let's say, we'll see what this looks like. We don't want it for all, but we'll do 10 at top and 10 at bottom. And we can start seeing that take shape. Okay? And if I wanted to change the font, I could. Right now, the font for the page is by default this kind of Times Roman. I can always click on my body tag and go to here. And in this case, it didn't bring it up, so I can just go down here and say I want to redefine a tag, the body tag. I want it in the Netiquette. That looks good. And I could say that, for the page, by default, I want to use Georgia as my font family. And then I'm going to hit apply, and you'll see that kind of start to take shape. And this is where, too, I could go with my font color, and I could choose a font color. In this case, I know which one I want, so I'm going to apply, and then now I'm just going to do, we'll go to margin and going to just set 0 margin for all. Alright, so I hit OK. So I can start seeing it take shape. And so I find that this is very helpful. So we're going to do the footer now. I'm going to say less specific. External style sheet, Netiquette, that looks good. And this is where really with the footer, if we look at the example, it's it's that fine print at the bottom. And so in this case, keep the font family the same. Font size, we'll go with 12. Hit apply. You can see it's, you could probably even go with a 10 and see what that looks like. The font, we could even probably use that same gray we used for the border. If you remember under block, we want to make sure we have that because it's an HTML5 tag displayed as block, so that looks good. And uncheck this and add a basic padding above and below for now. So we start getting some separation. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my text under each one of these. And so this is where I'm actually going to copy and paste. In your case, this is where you want to spend time deciding what are your Netiquette principles that you think your learners need to know. And at this point, you hopefully have those already identified. So I'm going to paste that in. Okay, so it's starting to take shape. Now, there are a number of ways that I could format some of this within. For instance, if you think about the principles that Robin Williams talks about and her design books and this principle of CARP, and so the idea is contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity. In this case, contrast is a way to, two things you want to think about is how can you add contrast to the headings to draw the user's eyes there, but also how can you chunk them to proximity and make it close to the text that's under it. And so in this case, I'm just going to create this as an H1 tag. So that's my heading 1. And so you notice that when it did, it applied it to everything in that section. So if I scroll down, you see that it's not elsewhere. But if I go to split view, the reason why is it put that H1, it closed it at the end. But if I move it up, you can see how it responds better. This is why a lot of times I will just, it's just faster and easier for me to type in my HTML myself. So that's in HTML. You always want your closing tag. So I can go down and do it some more. And just like that, I'm going to close it a little tighter and I'm going to save. You always look for these little asterisks will tell you that you need to save. So I do a save all. So in this case, the contrast is great, but in some ways, it's almost too big because it's as big as the title. And so you definitely want that smaller because it's less important. But also, its proximity isn't great. So what I want to do is the first thing I want to do is I want to add some styles to this H1 tag. So I'm going to click on H1, I'm going to click on the plus sign, I'm going to go less specific. In this case, I'm going to leave it as this, section H1, make sure it's in my external style sheet, and it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the font size down. We'll see what 24 looks like, and that might be okay. I'm going to change my font family, my heading, we'll see what this looks like, and then we will basically add just a little margin at the bottom. And so by default, an H1 tag likes to add a lot of white space around it, where in fact, if you think about the principles of CARP, you actually want as little as possible. And I hit OK there. So in this case, it worked great, and you'll see that it applied it to each one of those. Now, be aware that if you have paragraph tags, in this case I don't because of the way I copied it in, but you very well might have a P tag, a paragraph tag around your. And then you'll notice that if you have a paragraph tag around the text, it doesn't do everything that you just wanted it to do. So if you're very consistent, you can make sure that you just don't have the paragraph tags in there. More often what I do is I'll just go in and I will change the top margin of my paragraph style. So I'm going to hit plus sign, and I'm going to be less specific, and I'm going to hit OK. And basically for the top, I'm going to put 0. We'll see what that looks like, and you see how that brought it right back up. And so you can play with these and see how you like the spacing, but always keep in mind good design principles of how you can draw the user's eye to your page and focus on what they see. And so let's take a look at this. We're going to go to live view. We can see, or we can take a look at it. Let's undo live view, and we will take a look at it in Firefox. So you can see it's coming together. Still have to focus on the call out. You'll see in the example we also have a different background color. So the background color is actually the body. So I can go to Netiquette and I can always go all the way to my body, and here it is, and I can focus on adding a background color. So in this case I know the background color I want to use, but I'm just going to type right in here. Now when you do this, what you want to be very careful with is that you don't delete your closing curly brace, and that you make sure that you have your semicolons after these. So I'm going to hit design, and there I can see that. I'm going to do a save all. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet, but we will in the end, is that it's really important to start commenting out and organizing your code as much as possible. So with XHTML, you would do, a lot of times people would spend a lot of time adding comments to say this is the end of this section. And so in this case, with the section tags in HTML5, it's less important, but you might find that, especially when you have multiple sections, that it might be helpful to comment out and add some text that would say this is the end of the what is Netiquette section. So basically over here, I would go to apply HTML comment to do that. So and that's how you do it. And so then with the CSS, you can reorganize your code and add some comments. So you have, for instance, all of your tags together, all of your headings together. So whenever you think about your styles, especially, see in this page, it's a real short style sheet. But if you look at some websites, they can have a style sheet that's, 2,000 lines of code. And so in that case, it becomes very important to understand and look at comments because they make sense of what each section of style is really doing. The last thing we're going to focus on right now is this callout box. And so if we click on callout, we'll see down here it's the side tag. So we're going to click aside. And there's only going to be one here, so I'm going to say less specific. And a callout box, if we want to look at the example again, really serves the purpose of kind of summarizing key points, helping the user, especially if they're skimming the page, just get a basic idea of what are the main points. So in this case, we're going to focus on actually using different font family and different color backgrounds to kind of draw the user's eyes towards. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick a different font. So we'll do Courier New because it kind of stands out, it's different. We'll use 14 pix, pull it over and hit apply so I can start to see it take shape a little there. The next thing I'm going to do right away is I'm going to go display to block, hit apply. Now I'm going to go under box. I'm going to do float to the right. Okay, if we pull this down, you can start to see that take shape. And this is where in width, I'm just going to give a fixed width. We'll say 390 pixels. Let's hit apply. And to really start, let's focus on the background here. We're going to give a background color. In this case, I know the one I want to use, but if you didn't, like before, you would just go through here. This is one I'm going to use. I'm going to hit apply. I can start seeing that take shape. And so I'm going to focus on, right now, I'm jumping around a little, but in my mind, I'm thinking, how do I add some white space here? So there's some padding. And depending on where I want it to be in the page, I could always use my margins to kind of focus where it shows up. So you see how that forced it down to almost align with Netiquette. And I could play with that some and I could try to get it just right. But for now, that would work. And then I could still add some white space around it to make sure that the text that's next to it's not too close. So there that goes. So I'm going to focus on the border. And so one of the things we wanted to show in the example is how you can change your border, really add a different effect here. And so in this case, I'm going to do and then the last main thing is really the learner description. And so in this case, we're going to jump in here and we're going to focus on that right now because the learner description is there's not an exact HTML5 tag that makes that easy per se. And so we could use another heading tag, say, an H2, H3. But this example where you might actually want to just use a div or a span and then add an ID or a class to it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to split view and I'm going to be in source code HTML. Let's scroll to the top here. And I want to be basically between my header tag, my side tag, my callout box, and my section. And so I'm going to add a span tag. Now, if if I go up here to layout objects, you'll notice that I could add a div tag, but in this case, I'm just gonna, a span tag and a div tag are often used in the same ways. And so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to add, alright, so learner description. So I added a section called learner description. And so in this case, if I have that highlighted, I can go over here, and rather than a compound, I'm just going to change this to a class. Now, the nice thing about a class, I got to name it. So I'm going to name this learners. But a class is nice because then I could use whatever styles I apply to this. An example, it's a red font, but I could then reuse this on this page other places. So I'm going to hit OK. And so in this case, I'm going to make the font 14. I'm going to make the color, in this case, I know the one, so we're going to do that. Let's bring this down a little, hit apply. So we can see the red come through there. I'm going to just use a whole different font family here just to illustrate. But a lot of times you want to be very purposeful about when and how you use your font type. So you don't want to go overboard. Some rules of thumb out there that you don't want to use more than 2 or 3 at a time. So these are all some things to think about. But right now it's more just learning how to, be comfortable with HTML5, CSS3, and Dreamweaver. So the last thing I'm going to do is just add some padding. And so I don't want the same for all. So I'm just going to do 20 for a top, and we'll do 20 for the bottom, and hit apply and hit OK. So you'll notice in this case it actually did not apply the span tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out my CSS. I'm going to go all the way down and see learners. So learners is there. So what I'm going to do is highlight that. I'm going to go down to my properties panel, and I'm going to look down here, and I should see learners. I do. I'm going to apply it, and there we go. And so then I could add more about my learners, but you notice what it did, and this is why you have to love having the split view. It's because of the span tag. So there that is. So let's do a save all and take a look. And so you can start seeing it take shape. Last but not least, I'm going to go through and just clean up my code and look for any glaring errors. Like the first thing I notice is that it's untitled, so I need to title it. The other thing I like to do is go down here and apply source formatting just to clean it up a little. You can then go through and add some other additional comments as you see fit. So I added one end of what is Netiquette section, so you could do the same thing for the end of be friendly or whatever your principles are. You can then add some other information if you want to under the footer and so forth. And then similarly, you can go through with your CSS and you can organize this. And so always be careful when you're copying and pasting, moving things around, but you could basically add comment. You could do something like this. And so in that case, I would find my header section. Those are new HTML5 tags, and I would put that up here. The same way you could go down here and you could call this heading. And so this becomes less important. Here's another HTML5. This becomes less important when you have such a short style sheet, but when it gets big, it really does help. Once again, be very careful when you're copying, pasting, moving things around, but comments are important, and so be sure to add some and chunk your code where it makes sense and is helpful for others. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to Clean up the source code again. I'm going to save all. So just like that, we are almost done. The last steps, which we're not going to cover in this video, there are other videos that go over it, is to use the validation tools out there to make sure that you are using valid code. That's kind of the last step you'll take to ensure that there are no errors in your code. So be sure to make sure that your code is valid and add a badge and then save and upload your files to the Tech2 server. And also don't forget to add the URL to your 502 page for the Netiquette project.